Reality Transurfing, Book 1, The Space of Variations, by Vadim Zeland, Chapter 1, The Alternatives Model. The Guardian's Riddle. The Guardian's Riddle. There are different interpretations of the nature of fate. One interpretation is that fate is your lot in life, something predetermined and which, however hard you try, you can never escape. This definition is rather limiting, as it suggests that if a rough lot has befallen you in life, there's no hope of anything ever getting better. Despite this, there will always be those who willingly accept this definition of fate because it is convenient. They would rather life be reliable and future more or less predictable than live with the fear of uncertainty. Nonetheless, the total inevitability implied by this interpretation of fate leaves one feeling dissatisfied and even a little resentful. People who are deprived of good luck lament their fate and naturally question why life is so unfair. Why is it that some people have more than they could ever desire, while others never seem to have enough? Why is it that things come easily to some, while others never achieve results however hard they try? Some people are endowed with natural beauty, intellect, and strength, while others seem to have an inferior goods label stuck to their forehead for their entire life, as if paying for some kind of previously committed sin. Why does such inequality exist? Why does life in its endless diversity place limits on certain groups of people, and where exactly did those less lucky go wrong? People often feel hurt and indignant when they realize they are less fortunate than others, and they search for an explanation for their circumstances. This is when many people turn to teachings that support such ideas as karma and retribution for sins committed in previous lives. One would think that all the Lord our God had to do with his time was discipline his naughty children, and despite his omnipotence, he evidently struggles with the parenting side of things, putting off the punishment of retribution until a later date. One wonders what the point could be of punishing a person for something they do not actually remember doing. Another popular explanation for inequality spreads the false hope that those who suffer and live their lives in need will later receive generous compensation, although it is not clear whether good fortune awaits them in heaven or in a future life. Whatever the arrangement, explanations like these can never leave one fully satisfied. Whether past and future lives exist or not is also of little significance. You can only be aware of the life you are living now, and so in this sense, it is the only one you have. If you believe that your fate is predetermined, then the best remedy for the despondence you may feel is acceptance. There will always be people around to give you good advice like, if you want to be happy, just be happy. Be optimistic. Be satisfied with what you have. There will always be someone to tell you that the cause of your unhappiness is your own constant complaining and unrealistic expectations of life, and that you could be happy by definition if you would simply reconnect to your inner joie de vivre. Joie de vivre. You might half-heartedly agree, whilst at the same time awkwardly acknowledging how uninspired you really feel about greeting your dull life with newfound joy. Surely we have the right to expect more. Why should we have to force ourselves to be happy when it is as futile as trying to force yourself to love someone? Then there are the enlightened individuals preaching universal love and forgiveness. Their world is like a blanket of illusion that you can pull up over your head to protect yourself from encountering the severity of life head on, and everything does get a little easier as a result. Deep down, however, it is still difficult to comprehend why you should forgive those you hate and love those who you have no genuine feeling for. What good is happiness if it is faked? Let me repeat that. What good is happiness if it is faked? Surely happiness should come naturally rather than being squeezed from the soul like the last drop of toothpaste from the tube. There are others who refuse to believe that life is boring and primitive enough to be reduced to predetermined fate. This type of person would rather be satisfied with what they have managed to achieve by their own abilities than accept the lot they have been dealt. This is a different perception of fate, whereby you make your own luck, and good luck has to be fought for. That is just how it is. Wise people will tell you that life is not given to anyone on a plate, and that if you are not satisfied with what you have, you must dig your heels in and work hard to attain the happiness you want. The history books describe brave heroes who fought and labored day and night, overcoming unimaginable obstacles. The victors were rewarded with the laurels of success, but only after suffering all the burdens and privations of battle. This take on fate is not very logical either. Millions of people battle and labor, but true success comes to but a few. You can spend your entire life struggling desperately for a place under the sun and yet get nowhere. Why would life be so cruel and unyielding? What a heavy burden it is to have to battle with the world to get what you want, and if the world does not respond, to have to battle with yourself. How hard it is to believe that if you are poor, ill, ugly, or unlucky, it is your own fault, and that you are flawed and so must change. These ideas suggest that you are an accumulation of various shortcomings and defects which must be worked on. Unless you are lucky enough to be born rich and happy, your lot in life is either to humbly bear your own cross or dedicate your entire life to fighting against it. It is somehow not a view of life that readily fills the heart with joy. Surely there is a glimmer of hope among these dismal beliefs. Fortunately, there is a glimmer of hope that comes from a totally different view of things. The solution is as simple as it is enjoyable, in contrast to the other views described above. In Transurfing, the concept of fate is based on an alternative model of the universe. Before you wave your hand in disappointment and decide that you are being fed yet another chimera, remember that every known concept of fate originates from a specific worldview, which in turn is based on a number of unproven principles. For example, materialism is founded on the proposition that matter is primary and consciousness is secondary. Idealism claims the opposite. Neither of these philosophies has been proven, and yet models of the universe are constructed around both. Each model is convincing enough and has its loyal defenders. Both materialism and idealism explain the phenomenon of the world via philosophy, science, and religion, and both are right, and both are wrong in their own ways. Man will never be able to describe absolute truth with total accuracy because the notions used in our attempts to describe the truth are of themselves relative. There is a well-known parable about 3 blind men who describe an elephant by studying it with their hands. The first blind man touches the elephant's trunk, the second touches the leg, and the third touches ear. Each draws conclusions about what kind of animal the elephant represents based on their own findings. It would be pointless to try and prove that only one description of the 3 is correct. What is important is that the description be relative and applicable. You have no doubt heard the idea expressed that reality is an illusion created by the mind. but no one has explained in detail where the illusion comes from. Does it mean that we are all, in a sense, watching a film? Of course, it is highly unlikely that a concrete, rational substantiation of this idea will ever be upheld. Others hold the opposite opinion, that the material world is simply a mechanism which functions according to its own immutable laws and cannot be governed by human consciousness. There is surely an irrefutable grain of truth in this idea. The human mind likes to have its feet on solid ground, free of ambiguity, and so for centuries scholars have been tearing one theory to pieces in favor of another, which is then placed high on a pedestal. After every fight on the intellectual battlefield for truth, just one fact remains undefeated. Every theory represents a separate aspect of the phenomenon of a multifaceted reality. Let me repeat that. Every theory represents a separate aspect of the phenomenon of a multifaceted reality. Each theory that stands the test of time has its place, for they all represent one aspect of reality. If you decide that fate is something predestined that you cannot personally change, then this is how it will be. In effect, you are voluntarily giving yourself to the will of others, becoming like a small boat floating at the mercy of the waves. If, however, you decide that you can create your own destiny, then you will consciously take responsibility for everything that happens in your life, battling against the waves in an attempt to sail your little boat. You may have noticed that whatever you choose is always manifested. What you choose is what you get. Let me repeat that. You may have noticed that whatever you choose is always manifested. What you choose is what you get. Whatever worldview you choose to believe in, the truth of that worldview will always be on your side, and others will argue with you because they too are right. Any aspect of reality can be taken as a starting point and subsequently developed into a whole field of knowledge, and it will have logical consistency and successfully reflect one manifestation of reality. An entire field of knowledge can be substantiated by just one fact which, although not fully understood, has its place. For example, quantum physics is based on a number of unproven truths and postulates, which cannot be proven because they serve as the basic starting point for a given field of knowledge. In quantum physics, a microcosm sometimes acts as a particle, and sometimes as a wave. Unable to provide an unambiguous explanation for such dualism, scientists took the phenomenon to be an axiom. The postulates of quantum physics bring together different aspects of reality in all its diversity of form, just like the blind men in the parable in one case proclaimed that the elephant functions like a stump, and in the other like a snake. If in describing the microcosm one chooses to start with the particle quality as fundamental, then one arrives at the model of the atom created by the famous physicist Niels Bohr. In the Bohr model, the electrons rotate around the nucleus like the planets in the solar system. If, on the other hand, one takes the main quality to be the wave, then the model of the atom will look like a blurry dot. Both models work, reflecting different manifestations of reality. In this case, too, one could say that the scientists get what they choose. Any manifestation of reality can serve as a postulate, or the basis for an argument which will undoubtedly make sense and have its place. In search of truth, people have always striven to understand the nature of the world, studying its individual parts. Bodies of science knowledge were created to describe and explain the various phenomena of nature, and often they contradict each other. The nature of the world is one, but it reveals itself to us in many guises. As soon as one face has been studied and explained, another appears that does not fully correspond to the first. Scientists have attempted to overcome these contradictions by encompassing a diverse manifestation of reality in a single model of the universe, but this is no easy task. There is one irrefutable fact that unites and reconciles all branches of knowledge, and that is the diverse and multifaceted nature of reality. Variability is the world's most fundamental quality. Let me repeat that. Variability is the world's most fundamental quality. For some reason, the defenders of different fields of knowledge disregard this fact in their attempts to describe individual phenomenon, despite the fact that there is so much that could be learned from it. Variability is a key reference point, just like 0 is the main reference point on a coordinate grid. Any starting point for a particular area of knowledge is secondary in relation to this key reference point of variability, and yet it is bypassed as if it held no information. Nonetheless, it does carry information, and information of quite an extraordinary nature. To solve the Guardian's riddle, we will take the quality of variability as a starting point. In other words, we will take as a postulate the fact that reality manifests itself in an infinite variety of forms. Let me repeat that. To solve the Guardian's riddle, we will take the quality of variability as a starting point. In other words, we will take as a postulate the fact that reality manifests itself in an infinite variety of forms. Despite the very nature of this postulate, it reveals quite fascinating knowledge. We start with the idea that all diverse manifestations of reality originate in a common source. The world manifests itself as movement of matter through time and space, and this movement is subject to certain laws. As you know, points are plotted on a graph in accordance with mathematical formula. You could say that the function which determines how points are plotted on a graph is also a law. So, where are the laws of the universe written? Formula, like laws, are but an abstract product of the human mind created for the convenience of expressing concepts. It is highly unlikely that the laws of nature are recorded anywhere. Could a graph be created that marked the positions of all points of matter? Of course, one could theoretically mark the coordinates of the infinite number of all existing points in the universe, but the capacity of the human memory is too limited to cope with such a massive volume of data. Nature, on the other hand, has no difficulty with eternity. Nature has no need for a formula to generalize the position and movement of points on a graph. If the graph line were to be broken up into infinitely small points, then every point could be seen as a cause and the next point as the consequent effect, whereby any movement of a point of matter through time and space could be perceived as an infinite chain, infinitesimal examples of cause and effect. In science, we describe the movement of matter in terms of laws, but in nature this movement exists in its natural form as the infinite flow of cause and effect. Generally speaking, information concerning all possible points along the path of moving matter is stored in an information field which we refer to here as the alternative space. The field contains information about everything that has been, is, and ever will be. Let me repeat that. Generally speaking, information concerning all possible points along the path of moving matter is stored in an information field which we refer to here as the alternative space. The field contains information about everything that ever has been, is, and ever will be. The alternative space is a material information structure. It is an infinite field containing information on all possible scenarios of any event that could ever possibly take place. One could say that the alternative space contains absolutely everything. We can hardly guess the form this information takes, and yet our purpose here does not require us to know this. The important thing is to establish that the alternative space serves as a template or coordinate grid for the movement of all matter in time and space. Let me repeat that. The important thing is to establish that the alternative space serves as a template or coordinate grid for the movement of all matter in time and space. Every point in space contains its own version of a given event. For the ease of understanding, let us say that each variation or version has a script and scenery. The scenery is the external form of a phenomenon, whereas the script is the path that matter moves along. For the sake of convenience, the alternative space can be said to have different sectors. The greater the distance between the sectors, the more the script and scenery will differ. A person's destiny also has numerous alternatives. Theoretically speaking, there are no limits to the scripts and sceneries of human existence because the alternative space is infinite. Any seemingly insignificant event can affect a twist of fate. A person's life, just like any other movement of matter, represents a chain of cause and effect events. In the alternative space, the effect is always located in close proximity to its cause. Let me repeat that. In the alternative space, the effect is always located in close proximity to its cause. One follows the other, and so the sectors of a person's destiny create a lifeline. The scripts and settings of the sectors on one line are more or less uniform. A person's life flows evenly in one direction until such time as an event occurs that changes the scripts and sceneries. When this happens, destiny takes a turn and shifts to another lifeline. Experiencing lifelines placed very close together is like watching a play and then the next day going to the theater again to see the same play, but this time the stage scenery is different. If during the next theater season you saw the play with the same actors, but there had been significant changes to the script, this would be like experiencing a lifeline situated slightly further away in the alternative space. Finally, if you watch the same production in a different theater, you would see a totally different interpretation of the play, and this would be like experiencing a lifeline that exists a significant distance from the first. Reality has such diversity in form because the number of alternatives for its manifestation is limitless. Let me repeat that. Reality has such diversity of form because the number of alternatives for its manifestation is limitless. Any starting point for one or another form of manifestation results in a chain of cause and effect relationships. One could say that reality unfolds through life depending on the selection of the original reference point, and so ultimately, everyone gets what they choose. You have the right to choose precisely because an eternal number of alternates already exist. No one is preventing you from choosing the destiny you would feel comfortable having. Managing your own destiny comes down to one single thing: making the choice. Let me repeat that. Managing your own destiny comes down to one single thing: making the choice. Transurfing shows you how to make that choice. So an information structure exists that contains an infinite number of potential alternatives, each with its own unique script and scenery. The process of transformation into physical reality corresponds to that laid down in the information structure. How matter moves through the alternative space can be demonstrated by the following metaphor. Imagine a water pipe with a cooling ring that moves slowly along the pipe, causing the water inside it to freeze. The effect of the cooling ring makes it look as if a crystal of ice is moving through the water. Water molecules tend to remain in roughly the same place in a relatively free state. At the moment that the cooling ring passes through a given sector of water, the molecules inside the ring are solidified into frozen crystal. As the ring moves further down the pipe, the frozen water in the area behind the ring melts again and the molecules are freed up. It is not the crystal itself that moves. In other words, it is not a single chunk of ice that floats through the water, but the potential to create the structure of ice, i.e., the frozen state. The water in the pipe serves as an analogy for the alternative space, and the crystal of ice as an analogy for the material manifestation of a particular alternative. The water molecules are like people, and their position in the crystal structure is like a manifestation of physical reality of one possible fate. There is no single answer to the question of what the cooling ring symbolizes. In other words, how and why the information structure transforms into physical matter, no one can say. In a microcosm, matter can behave as a bundle of energy. We know that in a vacuum, for example, microparticles undergo a continual process of birth and annihilation, suggesting that matter is present and yet it does not represent a physical substance. The one thing that is clear is that the things we can touch have an intangible energetic foundation to them. I hope I have not overwhelmed the reader with too much physics, particularly as we are just at the very beginning of transurfing. The things you learn in this book may come as a bit of a surprise, so naturally I offer some theoretical substantiation just to help the mind keep a firm footing. Do be patient. The wave is another analogy for the process of physical manifestation, in which the sea is the alternative space and the wave the material manifestation of a given alternative. Take a wave that forms in the sea after an earthquake. It looks like the wave moves across the surface of the sea in a hump, but in fact, the water remains in the same place. It is not a mass of water that is moving across the sea so much as the energetic potential for transformation into physical reality. It is only when the accumulation of water finally reaches the shore that it breaks on the ground. Any other waves behave in the same manner. Does this mean that material manifestation moves through time and space while the potential alternatives remain in one place for eternity in the space of everything that was, is, and will be? Why not? Time of itself is as static as space. The passing of time is only felt when it turns like a film footage, one shot following another. If you unroll the film and look at all the frames put together, there is no time because all the frames exist simultaneously. Let me repeat that. If you unroll the film and look at all the frames put together, there is no time because all the frames exist simultaneously. Time is static until we start looking at it, each frame in sequence. It is the same in life, which is why the idea that everything comes and goes is so deeply rooted in our minds. Everything that is recorded in the field of information has always been there and will always be there. Lifelines exist like a reel of film. Things that have happened in the past do not just disappear, and what has yet to be in the future is already present here in the now. The current section of a person's life is a material manifestation of the alternative space in this section of their lifeline. This idea might be slightly perturbing, and you may be asking yourself, how is it possible for countless alternatives of your own fate to exist simultaneously in stasis? Who is responsible for this? God or the laws of nature, perhaps? Imagine a point on a coordinate grid. In school, we are taught that any point on the grid can have any x and y coordinate, from minus to plus infinity, and yet it does not occur to anyone to ask why a point can have absolutely any coordinate. Imagine if the point that moves along the function line were surprised and asked, how can this be that the path I have traveled so far has always existed and always will, and how can it be that the path I am about to travel has already been outlined in advance? It would seem strange to the point, but not to you because you are observing its path from above, able to see things from a different perspective. The alternative space serves as a template that determines how physical reality can show itself. Imagine a person walking through a dark forest with a torch. In the dark, the person holding the torch lights up a small area around themselves. The entire forest is like the alternative space, while the area which is lit up is like the physical manifestation of the alternative in that area. The question remains as to what provides the light. In other words, what ignites, i.e. materializes a particular alternative within the template. To answer this question, we need to take a different starting point. Nowadays, most people agree that thoughts are material. There is also evidence that reality takes two forms. On the one hand, material existence defines consciousness, and on the other hand, there is clear evidence to the contrary, indicating that consciousness also defines physical existence. Therefore, thoughts not only provide the motivation for human action, they also have a direct influence on our reality. Let me repeat that. Therefore, thoughts not only provide the motivation for human action, they also have a direct influence on our reality. For example, our worst expectations generally tend to come true. Of course, one could argue that this is not because our thoughts were materialized, but rather that our thoughts were a premonition of impending misfortune that would have occurred anyway. There is undoubtedly much that is unclear and ambiguous about paranormal phenomena. However, that does not mean that one should ignore or negate the relationship between thought and the process of material realization. Much evidence exists to indicate the direct impact of thought on reality. One way or another, individual consciousness shapes a person's destiny. This book focuses specifically on how this is possible. Thought energy transforms possible alternatives into physical reality. Let me repeat that. Thought energy transforms possible alternatives into physical reality. This statement is correct because reality can be manifested in any form defined by consciousness. Evidence of this hypothesis can be found not only in everyday life, but also in the experiments of quantum physics. For our purposes, the specific mechanism by which thought energy interacts with the alternative space is of no great consequence. It is not yet clear by what means the transfer of information takes place, whether on an energetic level or by some other means. For convenience sake, we will simply work with the idea that thought energy lights up a certain sector of the alternative space, as a result of which one alternative is transformed into physical reality. Waves of thought energy find the sector in the alternative space that correspond in quality. The alternative of that sector is then made manifest on the physical level, marking the process of how consciousness creates reality. You should bear in mind that this is only one way of manifesting reality. Generally speaking, it is not possible to create the reality you desire simply by sitting in one place and contemplating it. Let me repeat that. Generally speaking, it is not possible to create the reality you desire simply by sitting in one place and contemplating it. Although people do exist who are capable of materializing objects literally out of air, they are very few in number and as a rule do not advertise their abilities. Nonetheless, thoughts have as much impact on a person's destiny as concrete actions do. People are used to the idea that there is a visible and clearly comprehensible connection between their actions and the consequences of them. By contrast, the impact of one's thoughts manifests imperceptibly and so appears inexplicable and unpredictable. It might seem difficult to determine a causal relationship between one's thoughts and subsequent events, but soon you will see that the connection is quite direct. A person gets what they choose. Some may conclude that I seem to be saying that the seas, mountains, planets, and galaxy are all just a product of their personal thought energy. This is because people have a tendency to consider themselves the center of the universe, whereas in actual fact they are just a tiny dot in infinite space. The world is inhabited by millions of living organisms, and every single one of them contributes to the creation of reality. Let me repeat that. The world is inhabited by millions of living organisms, and every single one of them contributes to the creation of reality. Every living being has its own characteristic thought energy. If you are not comfortable viewing plants as capable of thought, then you can refer to the process differently. It does not change the nature of the phenomenon. No one can say for sure, nobody can say with certainty that inert objects do not have a quality similar to the thought energy emanated by living beings, to say nothing of the one spirit permeating all things, which we call God. Every being has consciousness and forms the layer which makes up its own world. One could say that everything in this world carries a particle of God, and this is how he governs the whole world. We all live in the same world, and yet every individual moves along their own lifeline. The qualities of the material world are the same for everybody. It is just that its concrete realization is unique within the context of a person's life. For example, imagine you are a tourist walking around a beautiful city. You admire the sights and the architecture. You take in the flower beds, the fountains, the park avenues, and the smiling faces of the city's prosperous inhabitants. Then, as you pass by a rubbish bin, you see a homeless person. He is in the same city as you, and the same dimension, but he does not see what you see. He sees an empty bottle in the bin, a dirty wall, his competitor who wanted the bottle too, and a policeman eyeing him with suspicion. You live on one lifeline and the homeless man on another. Your lifelines intersected at a point in the alternative space, bringing you together in the same world in the dimension of physical reality. All manifestation of material nature has an energetic foundation. The energy field is primary, and all physical manifestation is secondary. Scientists attempt to unite different manifestations of energy within the context of a single theory, and soon they will achieve good results. However, they will find that they have to keep adding many more things to the theory because reality takes an infinite number of forms. Without going into too much detail, we will take energy to be an abstract force which is invisible but nonetheless exists. For our purposes, it is enough to accept the fact that the energy of human thought is material. Thought energy does not just spin round inside a person's head. It flows out into the space beyond the head and interacts with the wider energy field around us. Let me repeat that. For our purposes, it is enough to accept the fact that the energy of human thought is material. Thought energy does not just spin around inside a person's head. It flows out into this space beyond the head and interacts with the wider energy field around us. Few would dispute this fact now. For convenience sake, we can talk about the parameter of thought energy, that is frequency, just as radio waves have a frequency. Whenever you think about something in particular, the frequency of your thoughts become attuned to a certain area within the alternative space. When the thought energy reaches the relevant sector in the alternative space, the potential reality held within that sector begins to materialize. Energy has a highly complex structure and permeates everything that exists in the world. When energy passes through the human body, it is modified by that person's thoughts. By the time it exits the body, it has acquired the same parameters as the thoughts. A radio transmitter works in the same way. Energy absorbs the characteristics of the thoughts of one's mind. When energy exits the human body, it radiates outwards in a thought wave that in turn transforms the sector of the alternative space into physical reality. Whenever you think about something, be it negative or positive, you are radiating thought energy in the alternative space. Let me repeat that. Whenever you think about something, be it negative or positive, you are radiating thought energy in the alternative space. Modified energy accumulates in a specific sector of the field, and this has the effect of introducing corresponding changes into your life. The circumstances of a person's life are not only created by their actions, but also by the nature of their thoughts. If a person has a hostile attitude towards the world, they will find the world responds to them with the same. If a person constantly expresses dissatisfaction, they will find more and more reasons to be dissatisfied. If a person's attitude to life is predominantly negative, the world will show them the worst side of its nature. Conversely, having a positive attitude is the most natural way to change your life for the better. People get what they choose, like it or not. That is how life works. Let me repeat that. People get what they choose, like it or not. That is how life works. While your thoughts are pretty much homogeneous, you will stay on the same lifeline. As soon as your relationship to reality changes in any way, the parameters of thought energy take on new characteristics, and the material manifestation of the layer of your world shifts to another line. On this new line, events unfold according to a different script in accordance with the parameters of thought. If for some reason you dislike the new script, you will struggle to change the situation. People tend to react negatively when they come up against obstacles, expressing their dissatisfaction or falling into despair. As a result, the thought energy they radiate refocuses to a line on which the number of obstacles is even greater, making it seem as if their life is a slippery slope. It might seem as if this process cannot be controlled, but in fact the individual is in control, and it is their own thoughts that are directing the path of material realization into problematic areas of the alternative space. People think that obstacles can be overcome by action, but in actual fact they ultimately experience whatever their dominant thoughts are. Let me repeat that. People think that obstacles can be overcome by action, but in actual fact, they ultimately experience whatever their dominant thoughts are. So if you choose to battle against the obstacles of your path, you will experience an abundance of obstacles. If you are absorbed by thoughts about your own problems, you will find that there are always problems in your life. Even if you take action to change the situation on your current lifeline, on the material level, it will not change the original script in the alternative space. All you can effectively do is choose a different script. Let me repeat that. All you can effectively do is choose a different script. By trying to change parts of the script you do not like, you inevitably get caught up thinking about what you do not like. Your thoughts are then successfully realized, and you end up getting what you do not want. Let me repeat that. Your thoughts are then successfully realized, and you end up getting what you do not want. You cannot change anything about the current lifeline, just as in an art gallery you cannot take away or reconstruct exhibitions that are not to your taste, as you are not the owner. However, no one is to stop you from turning round and walking into the next room to look at something you can appreciate more. Of course, the shift to a lifeline in which everyone gets what they want on demand does not happen simply by wishing for it. Not all thoughts can be realized, and not all desires are fulfilled. The reason for this is not the content of a person's thoughts so much as their quality. A dream or a wish does not qualify as a choice. Dreams do not come true. Let me repeat that. Dreams do not come true. To create the reality you want, you have to observe certain conditions, which you will read about later in this book. The alternative space contains an infinite number of possible lifelines for every individual. No one should feel hard done by if they do not like their fate, because everyone has the right to choose. The problem is that we do not know how to choose. The world has such diversity of form, one would think it was created to satisfy any need. Everyone can find whatever their heart desires. Even in the academic world, life manifests the side of it we wish to see. For example, Idealism holds that the world is an illusion, and life agrees. Materialism says the opposite, and again the world has nothing against that. People argue with each other, trying to force others to accept their relationship to the world, and yet the world shows that they are all right. Is that not wonderful? The alternative space is the so-called illusion, and material realization is what is meant by physical reality. We always get what we choose. Those who are familiar with the principles of Islam will understand what is meant by a person's fate is written in the book. This means that fate is preordained and therefore cannot be changed or avoided. Similar statements can be found in other religions. In a sense, a person's destiny is indeed already preordained. The error of religion is in teaching that there is just one version of a person's fate, when in fact there are endless alternatives. They say you cannot avoid your own fate, and to some extent this is true because it is impossible to change the script within any given alternative of it. To battle with the world around you in the hope of changing your fate is a difficult and thankless task. It is not worth trying to change the script. It is far more effective to choose a different alternative more to your liking. Of course, this is all quite strange, and you may quite reasonably have your doubts. I do not expect anyone to accept the alternatives model just like that. I did not believe in it myself until I became convinced that it actually works, and flawlessly at that. It makes no sense to give preference to one model of the universe over another, just for the sake of some absolute truth. It is not the model itself that has meaning so much as what it can help you achieve. Different mathematical models can illustrate the same physical phenomenon in different ways. It would be hilarious if specialists in analytical geometry suddenly took up arms against mathematical analysis and tried to prove that geometry is the only true mathematical discipline. Mathematicians have been able to agree amongst themselves, but philosophers and religious leaders have not. It is difficult to say where the alternative space actually is. From the point of view of our three-dimensional reality, one could say that it is everywhere and nowhere. Imagine an endless surface without beginning and without end, inhabited by two-dimensional people. These people would not suspect that a third dimension exists. They would believe that the surface they live on is the only world that exists and could not imagine that anything existed beyond it. We know, though, that a third dimension should be added to this model, and that an infinite number of similar surfaces could be created. So there is no need to be concerned if you cannot visualize an infinite number of parallel worlds aside from our own. It is just a matter of perspective. It is hard to believe in the existence of parallel worlds. Having said that, how easy is it to believe in the theory of relativity, which claims that an accelerating body increases its mass, reduces its size, and slows down the time through which it moves? It is impossible to test the theory firsthand, but it does not matter. It does not matter whether we understand a theory. What matters is the practical benefit that can be derived from it. In the context of infinite space, it is ridiculous and even petty to argue about the advantages of one model over another. Try to imagine the infinite in terms of increasing distances that never reaches a horizon. Oddly enough, infinity in terms of decreasing distance has no limit either. We can only observe a limited portion of the visible universe, for telescopes and microscopes have their limits too. Nonetheless, infinity in the context of the microcosm is no different from infinity in terms of the macrocosm. There is a theory that the visible universe emerged as a result of the Big Bang. According to the theory, the universe has been constantly expanding ever since. Celestial bodies move through the cosmos with phenomenal speed, but when we take into account the huge distances involved, it may seem as if the expansion of the universe is taking place incredibly slowly. It is also a well-established fact that in a vacuum, any given moment in time, elementary particles are born out of nowhere and then immediately disappear. We do not yet know the exact structure of elementary particles, but given the relativity of time and space, there is nothing to stop us perceiving each particle as if it were a separate universe like our own. Physicists claim that they can appear either in form of waves or in the form of particles. The further one goes into the microcosm, the more relative distances appear huge, and for the internal observer, time slows down. To an external observer, our universe might appear to last for just one brief moment, like a particle birthed and extinguished in a vacuum, whereas we, as internal observers, perceive the universe to have been in existence for billions of years. The next time you take a mouthful of coffee, ask yourself how many universes you have just swallowed. Infinity cannot be divided into parts. And so if you think about it, every time you swallow a mouthful of coffee, you are swallowing an infinite number of universes. Flying through a microcosm takes as long and seems as far as it does flying through the boundless expanse of outer space. Time, like space, goes on for infinity, whether you look backwards or forwards. Intervals of time can be as infinitely large as they can be infinitely small. Any point within a time interval can be seen as a reference point, both sides of which extend into the infinity of time. Changing the reference point to another place within the time interval does not change the extent of infinity in either direction. The infinity of worlds within worlds exists simultaneously. The center of the universe is at the same time to be found in every point of matter because every point is surrounded by infinity on all sides. Let me repeat that. The center of the universe is at the same time to be found in every point of matter because every point is surrounded by infinity on all sides. All events exist concurrently for the same reason that the center of the universe is located in every point at the same time. This is difficult to imagine, but so it is impossible to grasp infinity in one moment of contemplation. Even more convoluted theories have been designed which claim that the visible universe becomes a finite sphere in fourth-dimensional space. But that does not help particularly because, theoretically speaking, an infinite number of dimensions could exist. Unable to clearly imagine all of this, we have to content ourselves with a narrower perspective and at least pretend that we understand something of these theories. There are many things about contemporary science that are impossible to explain or comprehend. However, this should not prevent us from benefiting from the fruits of scientific thinking. Applying the principles of transurfing can lead to stunning results. The important thing is to decide from the very beginning not to torture yourself with questions of why and how exactly it all works, which would be as productive as a child asking a physicist why different bodies attract. The scientist would reply, because of the law of gravity. The child then follows with the question, how does the law of gravity work? Why do bodies attract? There is no answer to this question. So we will leave the thankless task of trying to explain these things, for it is not ours to know and understand everything. We will simply enjoy the results of the alternatives model. From the alternatives model, it follows that man can create his own destiny. Interpretations. In transurfing, the concept of fate differs from other more widely accepted interpretations. The difference is that in the context of transurfing, a person can choose their happiness. They do not have to fight for it. Let me repeat that. The difference is that in the context of transurfing, a person can choose their happiness. They do not have to fight for it. There is no need to accept or reject the alternatives model straight away. First, ask yourself this question. Have you achieved much by battling with the world to find happiness? Each person will decide for themselves whether they wish to carry on in the same vein or whether they would prefer to try using a different method. A person can spend their entire life battling without achieving anything at all. Would it not be simpler to act in a way that encouraged life to meet you halfway? For all life does is help manifest your personal choice. Whatever your order, your choice is always granted unconditionally. Let me repeat that. Whatever you order, your choice is always granted unconditionally. Choice, however, is different to desire. Wishes are only granted in fairy tales, and most people just keep on wishing. It is no wonder that the belief is so ingrained in our minds that wishes are very difficult, if not impossible, to fulfill. We have already taken the first small step towards solving the Guardian's riddle. Soon you will find out why wishes are not granted and dreams do not come true. End segment.